Thank you for coming to our first dig-in workshop. We have Jeanette Adams here today from the Master Gardener Society? Association of Manitoba. She's going to give us a gardening 101, and we're glad to have her here. She's an experienced vegetable gardener, and she's going to give us a talk for probably about half an hour or so, and then you'll have time for some question and answer. So let's welcome Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Dana, for the introduction and for the opportunity to come and talk to people about vegetable gardening. It's something that's near and dear to my heart because I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, and a vegetable garden was just part of life there. And even once I was out on my own, and as soon as I had a house, vegetable garden was part of the backyard. You will notice that the title is A Vegetable Garden Beyond a Single Row, because when I first gave this presentation in 2007, that was what most people's idea of a vegetable garden was that rectangle in the backyard and things growing in single rows. Well, since then, I'm amazed and very pleased at the renewal in vegetable gardening and people wanting to grow their own food, because it was becoming kind of a lost art. Everybody wanted their gardens to be beautiful and all the ornamentals and pushing the zones and whatnot, and they kind of forgot about food, and now people are more interested, and I'm very happy to see all of you here and wanting to learn about it. Why would you want to grow your own vegetables? Well, first of all, you will know how those vegetables are being grown, what you've put into them, and you know the farmer, which is, they're saying, know your farmer, grow locally, buy from the farmers markets. But if you're growing your own, you will certainly know where these vegetables are coming from. Also, the freshness and the taste. I mean, one year I couldn't put in my garden, it was too wet, and I thought, I must have my fresh lettuce. So that's when I started the companion planting, because the only place I could kind of get into was the flower bed where I was planting impatiens. And lettuce is one of the few vegetable crops that can grow in some shade. So I planted my lettuce with my impatiens, and by the time the impatiens were getting big, we had eaten the lettuce. So, it's just the taste of vegetables freshly picked. Another one is beans, green beans. I usually have more than I need to eat fresh, and so I will either pickle them or or freeze a few, but I don't like frozen beans. There is such an immense difference between a fresh cooked green bean and the thing that you get out of the frozen bag. So taste, of course. Thirdly is the learning experience. I'm sure just passing this knowledge on or sharing it with children is amazing, because there is so much that they can learn, and we keep hearing about the disconnect with people not knowing where their food is coming from, nature deficient children. So if you get them out there in the dirt and they can get the whole experience, it's not just the planting, it's digging in the dirt, the feel, the smell, the sounds that come from the entire experience of gardening. So that is certainly a great thing to be sharing in a family. But, there's a but. Once you've decided about the wonderful things that growing your own vegetables will bring you, there is a commitment involved, because growing vegetables requires more work, more attention than putting in some ornamentals. You have to check on them much more regularly, because cutworms in the spring can do a lot of damage in a 24-hour period, or if the bunnies discover your fresh beet tops, they could be all gone before you've even had a chance. So it does require more attention, and if you're going to enjoy those fresh flavors, you have to pick them at their optimum time. And you know, sometimes everybody's busy, it's not always that easy to get out there and pick those peas when they're ready. But again, if you're going to enjoy them, that's something that you have to decide, okay, this is a commitment, I'm going to do this. So where to begin? Well, first of all, your location. Vegetables do require sunlight, 6 to 8 hours. So if you've got mostly shade, you will have trouble trying to grow good vegetables because they do require that sunlight. You can, you know, put them in containers. That's even more labor intensive if you're going to start moving containers, you know, as the sun moves around your yard. You might want to talk to a friend or a relative or seek a plot in a community garden if it's a matter of not having the sunlight. The second most important thing is your soil. You need a good, loose, organic type soil, at least 12 inches or 30 centimeters in depth. That's if it's a ground plot. If you have raised beds, I would say you should have double that, because in raised beds, that soil is going to get used up, the nutrients more quickly, and you may have to double dig and turn it just to keep the nutrients going in the soil. I like to describe a good soil as if you take a lump of semi-moist soil in your hand and give it a squeeze and open your hand, that soil will sort of gently fall apart. It won't be a lump that, you know, a brick. Here in Winnipeg and Manitoba, good chances it's going to be a brick. So that's where your compost, the well-rotted manures, things like that. If you live somewhere where you've got access to, or that you can bag leaves in the fall, and then they'll partially decompose during the winter, you can even dig that in, or dig some of that in the fall. Not huge amounts, but enough that it would loosen up that soil. The next thing is to consider is what and how much to plant. Well, if you're just starting, if this is your first experience with it, start small, because you want to have a good experience with it. You don't want to be totally overwhelmed. And pick the things that you like to eat and that grow here. Sorry, we can't grow avocados here. So pick what will grow in our climate. And then choose some early crops to plant, like your lettuce, spinach, radishes. Radishes are a little tricky. They come up very quickly and you think, oh wow. But if the weather turns hot, they won't form. You'll get a whole bunch of leaves and you won't get those radishes. So they're one crop that likes their cool weather and to get nice radishes. Then pick some the mid-season ones, the beans, the peas, the peppers, tomatoes, and your late-season crops, the root ones, your carrots, beets, squash. I mean, zucchini is kind of borderline. It's usually mid to late summer. Choose a good quality seed supplier. There are so many seeds. I mean, if you walk into Home Depot or some of those places, there's racks and racks of seeds. Choose a recognizable name if you can, or if you've done some research ahead of time, you can go online. There are several Manitoba seed companies that will have good seed. And again, the choices for things like carrots or cucumbers or lettuces are overwhelming. So if you're starting off and you don't have a particular type, a name of a particular kind in mind, look for the ones that they say, you know, long time favored or people's choice or whatever. Choose those over the new hot new item because that hasn't been tested. And it might be great to try, and it might be wonderful. But then again, if you want success, kind of go with the tried and true. And your bedding plants as well, your tomatoes, your peppers. I don't know how many have decided to start these things on their own, because that's a whole other workshop. But
So you don't plant them now. You
the
have to start them more.
yes,
from
any
seedlings.
bedding plants like tomatoes, peppers, those kind of things, they should be started already. But anything that you plant in the ground is, you will just be thinking about starting to put those things out. And which leads me to the next one of when to plant. Everybody's very excited and chomping at the bit this year because we had wonderful warm temperatures in March. That's air temperature. Seeds to germinate have to have at least 18 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit soil temperature. So the soil has to have warmed up. And also the nights. We have nice temperatures during the day, but the nights are still cool. So I would say you can be thinking, I planted some lettuce and spinach in my cold frame, and they have come up, but they're just, you know, they just came up. So they need some warmer weather in the evenings and not through the night to really start to flourish.
Sorry, what was the soil temperature?
The soil temperature has to be at least 16 Celsius or that's 8. Well, around 20 degrees, 18 to 20 Celsius and 60 to 70 Fahrenheit. And that's even when you're starting things indoors. You know, the soil, I've put things on a heat pad, the ones that really need to germinate. Peppers are a bad one. They will not germinate without some heat underneath them. If you're putting out bedding plants, whether they're flowers or vegetables, your tomatoes, your peppers, please wait till after the first usual frost-free day, which is around May 24th to 26th. That's why they always talk about the flurry of the Victoria Day weekend. Everybody's out planting because that's typically when we can say, okay, we're not going to get freezing temperatures at night. But there's no guarantees. I mean, I've been out with blankets in June covering things because they're, you know, the frost is coming. Gardening methods. Now, this is where the beyond the single row goes. Raised beds are very popular, and how high they are, that's your choice. But the arrangement of them and the width are important because to grow vegetables, you have to work around them. So I've seen lovely tiered, you know, raised beds in the corner of a yard. That's great for perennials and ornamentals, not for vegetables, because you don't want to walk on where your plants are growing. So your raised beds for vegetables, you have to be able to get around. And also, you know, you need to reach in, so don't make them too wide. And remember that with raised beds, that soil will have to be, what I call rejuvenated. You will have to either dig up from the bottom and turn it, or else you'll have to add new stuff occasionally, add, you know, your composted manures, and you'll have to water and fertilize more often because it'll dry out quicker since it's confined. Now, if you're growing on the ground plots, again, it does not have to be the rectangle with the single row. In fact, it shouldn't be. Divide your ground plot into plots, similar to a raised bed size that you can easily reach in and work in, because you want to avoid walking on your growing area as much as possible. If you have any kind of drainage problems, you can even have, you know, the area worked or turn it over by hand, however you choose to work it. And then mark off your paths, and you could dig some of that soil on and make what I call temporary raised beds. This is how I was gardening for the last few years. It was, because because I did have a drainage problem, and that was the best way of keeping the vegetables out of the water was, you know, mounding up the soil. But that's very labor intensive. I have a big plot. So this morning we got soil, and my husband had built me raised beds, and we've got raised beds. That'll be easier. And vertical, make sure you make use of vertical, especially in small areas. Anything that will grow up, your cucumbers, your peas, even some of the squash that don't produce really huge squash. Provide some kind of support system for them so that they can grow up rather than sprawling out. Things like peas have to be supported, otherwise if they sprawl out on the ground, chances are they'll get a mildew and you won't get much out of them. They're easier to pick when they're growing up too. Anyone who's growing heritage tomatoes, some of them that grow to be 6 feet tall will need a 6 foot tall, sturdy post punched into the ground, and tying them. Pantyhose work really well because they stretch and they don't bruise the stems. But with the kinds of winds we get around here, if you have tall tomato plants with a lot of fruit, you have to really, the tomato cages don't work for them. Containers. Containers are very popular, and you can use just about anything as long as it's big enough for whatever it is you're going to plant. Lettuces don't need much depth because they have shallow root systems. But if you're going to grow any kind of root vegetables or things like tomatoes that need a lot of nutrients, you have to have a big enough container. I think the city is going to, with their recycling, there's going to be a lot of blue boxes that aren't going to have a use. That is a possibility, especially for something big. Potatoes can grow in a container like that. The only thing if you're going to grow potatoes in a container is you only put in partial soil, and as the potato starts to grow, you add soil. And that's like hilling, because potatoes, to get potatoes, you have to hill them. I mean, you plant them, and as soon as they're up a sizable amount, you have to dig around them because they won't produce potatoes. They don't really go down, they go out. And so that's why I'm thinking those blue boxes, because they already have drainage holes in them. They could be used certainly for something that requires a lot of soil and space. And that's my other thing about the drainage. If you're on a balcony, be careful about the drainage. You still have to have drainage, but you don't want it draining out onto your underneath neighbor. So you may have to put something underneath to catch. Just don't let water stand in whatever you're catching the water in. Like empty that, because soils don't want to be sitting in water. And a suitable soil mix. A lot of the bagged soils that you get now are not really soil. They'll say 4 containers, blah, 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 all this stuff. They're a soilless mix. There is no earth in there. It's peat moss, it's some kind of composted bark material, and vermiculite or perlite or something to provide the drainage. If you want to get some of this container soil mix, that's great because it does have that light weight so you don't get rocks, too solid. But then go and buy an actual bag of something that says topsoil or has soil and mix the two. I would say 2/3 of the container soil to at least 1/3 of soil, because that soilless mix has no nutrients. You have to add fertilizer or compost tea or something, because there's nothing in it. It's just, you may as well grow hydroponically because there's no food in it. Creative or companion planting. Now that's, again, terms such as kitchen garden, soup garden, potager, parterre. Those are on the ground plots, but that's where you're doing your companion planting, your decorative planting. If you don't want just, you know, sort of vegetables, you can plant however creatively you want. You know, you can plant in blocks, you can plant in drifts, you can knot gardens up. I wouldn't even attempt. They're very complex. If you Google any of these, there's pictures galore of how to be very sort of artistic and mixing vegetables and ornamentals. It started because people wanted to have their little sort of soup garden or kitchen garden right next to their door, but they didn't want it to look really bland, so they started mixing herbs. A lot of our herbs have now become ornamentals, but when people used a lot of herbs for medicinal purposes, these herbs would flower next to the house and you know, would be ornamental as well as useful. So how complex you get with that kind of arrangement is based on your imagination, your budget, and your energy level. So, you know, whatever you want to try. And I have included on the handout on the back, there's some suggestions for companion planting, like what things go together and what things don't like each other. And then also crop rotation, which is sort of what things to plant together, and as far as vegetables. And then that's a 4-year crop rotation, and I'll get to that in a minute. Also, planting methods, how you plant. The instructions on the seed packages are mainly for commercial growers. So the spacing, you're not going to follow that in a small garden because you wouldn't have very much planted if you allowed 3 feet for cucumbers and whatnot. Depth, though, is important because you don't want to bury something too deep, or you want to make sure it's got enough soil on it that it doesn't sprout and all of a sudden we get hot weather and it withers. Carrots are one of the ones. I mean, they're tiny, tiny seeds. You don't want to bury them too deeply, but if they just germinate and it gets hot, make sure you water because they'll just shrivel up on you. So depth is important to follow what's on the seed packages, but as far as width, because you're probably gardening in a smaller space, you can do it more intensely. You can plant closer together and just thin. I mean, things like lettuces or whatever, you can eat them as you're thinning. And some other things, unfortunately, will have to go to the compost because they're not ready to eat, but you want to give your plants space. You can plant in blocks, like rather than the single rows. You can scatter seeds, like do a wide row. Peas are a good one to do in a wide row. Dig two paths, and that'll allow for your support, your fencing or whatever you're going to, your strings that you're going to put, and you have a row of peas on either side, and then just kind of make sure, guide them to the support system. Now, feeding and fertilizing. If you have started with a good soil to start with, if you've prepared your soil in the beginning, it's loose, it's got, you know, lots of organic material, you've perhaps added some slow release granular fertilizer, or some of the things that people are using now is alfalfa pellets. There's different brands, but it has alfalfa, which is, I mean, that's a hay crop that is a nitrogen fixing type of crop, and has a lot of nutrients, so they've, you know, compacted it and made it in a type of fertilizer. A combination of bone and blood meal, because that gives you the two most important sort of nutrients. Seaweed or fish fertilizers, most of those are a liquid type, so you would be adding that later once your plants are growing. And the latest thing is worm castings. So if anybody is into vermicomposting, or if you know people that are into that, you could get some of that. And there's even sort of a soluble type. You can mix it with water, but you have to keep stirring and, you know, sprinkle this on your rows of plants. So there are different types of certainly organic fertilizer that, and you can use, there's nothing wrong with using the Miracle Grows. Plants really don't know the difference. It's sort of your perception how organic you want to be. If you don't want to use the chemically created fertilizers, then you need to look for things labeled organic. But there's nothing wrong with the Miracle Grows. Avoid high nitrogen. Now, the first number, if you're buying fertilizer, you'll see there's usually 3 numbers. The first one is nitrogen, and that's, like if it's a lawn fertilizer, will have high nitrogen. You don't want that for vegetables because you're going to get a lot of foliage, not much fruit. The second one is your root builder. That's the phosphorus, and I know phosphorus is bad. Well, it's bad if you're pouring it on your lawn. It's not bad if you're putting a high phosphorus, especially to start things. Like when you're transplanting, you want to give it a fertilizer that would have the higher middle number. And that's where bone meal, it's a phosphorus base. And then the third number is potash, and that's kind of the nutrient that gives plants their strength and helps them blossom and produce fruit. So you certainly want something in that third number. You don't, especially towards the time of season when you're wanting blossoms and you're wanting your vegetables to start producing. Crop rotation, and that's that 4-year crop rotation. So you'd have 4 sort of areas and you'd plant accordingly. And then the next year you would plant differently. However you choose, clockwise, counterclockwise, but you would move the things around. Crop rotation is important for several reasons. One, different families of plants use different nutrients. And so you don't want to keep planting the same things in the same soil because they'll use up all that type of nutrient, and then they'll start to look kind of sickly because there's no food for them. The other one is that certain crops are susceptible maybe to certain types of diseases or insect pests. If you keep planting them in that same spot, chances are that those, fungal diseases or those insects will keep living in that spot and just come back year after year. So if you, even in a small area, even in raised beds, flip things around a little bit. Watering. Sprinklers, those rotating things, are for lawn. They are not for flowers or for vegetables. You want to water the soil, not the plants. So get some kind of soaker system or a watering wand that reaches down to the soil and water. Hopefully you can water in the morning, if not late afternoon. Avoid the hot middle of the day because it's just going to evaporate. A lot of times the plants, you'll see them kind of sitting there all wilted, the leaves are drooping. It's not necessarily that they don't have enough water in the soil. It's too hot. They've kind of shut down their system and they've gone into survival mode for that hot period of the day. And you'll notice even without watering, sometimes by 4 o'clock if it's gone shady there, and all of a sudden they're perked up. So it's not necessarily that they don't, or that they need water when they're drooping, but certainly if they don't perk up by evening, they do need water. You don't want to water late at night because the temperatures drop, and if there's water on, moisture on the plants, they're more susceptible then to fungal diseases. We can't control when the rain falls, but don't put cold tap water on them at night because they don't like it. And a thorough watering it's better to water less frequently, but a good soaking than to be doing a shallow sprinkling every night or every morning. Give them a good soaking, you know, once, twice a week. Depends on the weather, depends on whether it's raised beds, whether it's a hot, sunny location. So, but a good soaking. Even like just put your hand in the soil, and if it feels dry, you know, a couple inches down, you need to give it a good watering. Mulching. I become convinced that mulching is really important because it keeps the soil temperature more even, it conserves the moisture in the soil, it will keep your fruit and your vegetable, like the tomatoes or whatever, cleaner, because if there is a heavy rain, you don't get that soil splashing up on them. And it also smothers the weeds. Now what you would use an organic type mulch, like no rocks or wood chips or stuff like that near your vegetables. You use straw, a dry grass clippings, as long as they don't have a whole bunch of fertilizer or pesticides on them. Leaf mold, like that's the leaves that have been bagged up in the fall and are partially decomposed. You can use that. Even shredded newspaper, but the newspaper you're going to have to weigh down somehow, either with some soil on top or maybe some compost on top. But they work amazingly well. There's nothing toxic in the newspapers, because even the ink is now, the ink is now vegetable based. So you can use, and they will decompose after, you know. Usually, if you've put them on fresh in the spring and really wet them down when you're applying them and cover them somehow, by fall you can work them in, and by next spring they'll be gone. They'll have,
So when you're putting, are you putting the mulch just around the plants, or is it kind of covering also in between your rows?
well, you wait, if you've seeded your plants, say you've seeded some beans, wait till they're up, you know, a couple inches, give them a good watering, and even beside water, because you don't want the, you know, the capillary action where water is just kind of migrating. Then you apply your mulch, not right up to the plant. Leave a little air space there. And you can put your grass clippings, and you can certainly put it out in the dark space, because that's where you're controlling the temperature of the soil and conserving your moisture. But not right up against the plants, especially tomatoes. You want to leave just a little circle, because the tomato's going to get big. But that really helps, because tomatoes, one of the reasons they get the blossom end rot is uneven nutrients getting to them from uneven watering. So if you have a mulch, that kind of helps keep also, you know, having the right kind of nutrients, making sure they've got their calcium, because that's what gets the blossom end rot going. Pest and disease control. This, again, it's, you know, preventative medicine. If you've given them good soil, if they've got the nutrients, if they've got, you know, enough sunshine and water and everything, and you've applied some fertilizer, you shouldn't really have pests. But, you know, again, there's a but. You have bad weather. A couple years ago, we had terrible blight on our tomatoes and potatoes, and that was pretty well, I mean, from Saskatoon to here, and some of it had come in with a bad shipment of tomatoes, and then the weather was terrible. It's an airborne disease. This blight just, you know, really did terrible damage to the tomatoes. And tomatoes, potatoes, peppers are all, eggplants are the same family, so they were all susceptible to the late blight disease. So there are, you know, diseases are probably the worst. Weeds you can deal with, And the best way of dealing with weeds is just make sure wherever you're planting that you first get rid of things like the quackgrass and thistles and stuff like that before you even plant, because those are relentless. They'll just, any little root piece and they keep coming back. Annual weeds, get them pulled out before they go to seed, because if you let them go to seed, you'll have, 100 times more next year. And new soil often brings in, you don't know what kind of weeds are coming in with that, so get on top of them as soon as you can. Mulch will help. It will smother some of them, because if they don't get the sunlight, they won't grow. Also, for some of things like mildew on peas, look for seeds that say resistant to, or pick kinds of peas that are early, that produce early. There's one called Spring that starts setting up, peas are ready by no later than mid-July. And usually the powdery mildew on peas doesn't start until late. Like August is bad because the nights are getting shorter and cooler, and it's sort of prime time for that kind of disease. Insects. The most common insects on vegetables are, of course, you have to watch for the cutworms in the spring. You can set up barriers around things like your cabbage, your broccoli, your tomatoes, but things like peas and beans, you're planting those in bunches. You don't know where they're going to come up, so you can't be putting your little cans around them. You have to just watch. If you see one or more plants cut off at ground level and laying there dead, dig around. You'll probably find the culprit, and it'll quickly go into a little sea. Have 2 flat rocks handy. Works really well. And check them every day. If cutworms are kind of a spring thing, as the plants are emerging from the soil, that's when they're young, they'll chew them off. Then, then they go into the pupa stage and emerge as moths later. Aphids will get on your lettuce later on. They'll get on your dill. You can try the companion planting with that. Onion and garlic type crops seem to deter aphids. They won't prevent them, but I find it has worked for me, having those 2 things side by side. Potato beetles, that's another one that you have to hand pick. I mean, they have even become resistant to some of the powders that the commercial growers put on them. So unfortunately, they can't be running around picking beetles off, but small patch you can. Look for the adults. They're the striped brownish beetle. And then underneath the leaves is where they lay their eggs. You'll see sort of bright orange clusters. You can pull those leaves off or just smush the eggs. If you don't get them all, you'll see little orangey red bugs, and you'll start seeing chomping on your potato leaves, because that's what they go after. And pick them off. Recruit your kids, whatever. Pail of hot, of warm soapy water, and just throw them in there. Gardening is ruthless sometimes. Barriers, if you are going to grow things like cabbage or broccoli, that's where those white butterflies and then the green worms, they're hard to prevent other than some kind of a barrier system. Netting, or I know a friend of mine, what they did was they actually built these screen boxes and would kind of put them over each one. It would let water and sunlight in, but not the butterflies. You have to decide how badly you want the cabbage and the broccoli, or whether you'd rather go to the market gardener, because they are, there's a lot of them and they're very hard to keep off, and you don't want to be powdering, because that powder really gets into that's why the commercial cabbages, sometimes you're peeling and there's this icky black stuff in between the leaves. mentioned the companion planting. Herbs, try to mix herbs, especially strong smelling things, or some of the stronger scented flowers, the marigolds. I always plant marigolds with, you know, in amongst my vegetables. The bugs don't like strong smelling things. That's one of the reasons you can probably bring herbs into the house from outside, because chances are there's probably not as many bugs on them as there are on some of your ornamentals that you've put out. Organic or household methods. Now, just because something says organic does not mean that it is not harmful or dangerous. Some of the organic chemical or pesticides are even more toxic than the chemical ones. They just come from some kind of a plant or animal product. They still are made to kill something. So please, please, if you're going to use any kind of organic pesticides, read the instructions carefully and use them according to the instructions, because they can be dangerous as well. And household remedies, like if you hear, oh, I used this and it worked. Well, as long as they are saying, I used it and it worked, because there's all kinds of these homemade recipes now circulating. The one that I really don't like is the vinegar one, because they say, oh yes, you know, do this concoction of vinegar, salt, and water and pour it on your weeds, and it'll kill them. Yes, but it'll also kill everything else. So, you know, they have to tell you, and you have to check these out. I mean, some of them work, but just ask a little bit, not just if you read something in the paper that somebody has said, hint of the day, because it's not always a good hint. Harvest and cleanup. Again, be diligent and pick your vegetables when they're at their peak so that you can really enjoy them. Once that plant is finished, it's best to just pull up the stalks and either compost them. If you've had no diseases in there, you can put them in the compost. You may have to chop them, you know, so that it'll compost properly. I would not compost tomatoes or potato vines. They just harbor too many fungal type diseases. Just unfortunately, they have to go to the garbage. Things like corn stalks. Corn is difficult to grow in a small garden. Corn really does need a lot of space. It's wind pollinated, so it needs, you know, you can give it a try. There are some smaller varieties that are, you know, even said that you can grow them in containers, but you may not get as much satisfaction as you would want from them. And work your soil, especially garden plots or raised beds, work them up in the fall. I know there are some people that say, oh, don't do that. I disagree with that, because I feel you need to work whatever organic material you want into the soil so it has a chance to decompose. If for some reason your plots have become compacted, I mean, a lot of a very wet fall will just, it'll push the air out of the soil and it'll become compacted even if you haven't walked on it. So the frost action during the winter will break that up. And also, if any uninvited guests have burrowed into the soil or laid eggs in there, if you turn it up, it'll expose them and they hopefully won't make it through the winter. And keep a record of what you planted, the variety of seeds you used, maybe where you got them from, which ones were successful, which ones you really liked, so that when you go to buy or order your seeds the next year, you won't be thinking, oh, that was really a good cucumber. Now, you know, where did I get the seeds from and what kind was it? So if you want more information, there's tons and tons of information now on the internet. There's a couple of good books that are for this area. This is called Gardening Naturally. It's by Sarah Williams, a well-known horticulturist from Saskatoon, and Hugh Skinner. He's the son of the original Skinner from Dropmore that developed many prairie hardy plants. And it's not just on vegetables, it's on ornamentals and trees and shrubs, and it's got good pictures and, you know, about different kinds of problems and how to do, so it's an excellent book. And then there's one that just came out this spring. I don't have it, but it comes highly recommended, and I've seen it. It's called Edible Plants for Prairie Gardens, and it's by June Flanagan, Flanagan. And the reason I recommend them is because they are for our climate. So, because sometimes the things that are, you know, look wonderful, some of the books, they're not for here. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I can recommend the Master Gardener website. It's mgmanitoba.com. And there's a Ask a Master Gardener click space. I'm not very technical. Anyway, you can click on the Ask, and if you have a question, send it in, and one of us will try and respond with an answer. Now, questions? Yes?
I might have sort of related to this, but slugs are my nemesis.
Okay.
Please help.
Do you have a lot of shade and moisture?
Not where my vegetable garden is. It's on the west side of my house, and it's where I have the most sun. I do have 20 trees in my yard, in front and the back. So in the whole yard, yes, but not where the vegetable garden is.
Well, you can try like doing the trap things where you put down planks or stones or whatever to kind of lure them. You can do the beer lure thing, although they say that's kind of a waste of beer. And put down things like crushed eggshells. Some people have said the copper, and they gave a good hint of, instead of going and buying some really expensive copper wiring, is getting those pot scrubber, the copper pot scrubber things, and just, you know, unraveling them and putting them around your plants. I mean, what slugs like the most is sort of damp, moist places to hide with, you know, nutrients that they can eat. So if you can somehow, you know, protect your plants with unfriendly things like the crushed eggshells, you can get the diatomaceous earth, which is basically like sort of very sharp soil, but that gets expensive. And then lure them to other places that they will stay away from your vegetables. Another question. Yes?
When we're going to the nursery for our soil, what do you ask for topsoil, or is there a garden soil, or how do you?
You're wanting it for a
raised
plot, for a raised bed. I would recommend what's called a 4-way mix, because that has, it's got your sort of soil, your loam, it's got some peat moss, it's got sand, and it's got the composted manure. So that has nice. Well, they're all called topsoil, but there's 3-way mix, which doesn't have the manure in it. 4-way mix is best for gardens or like perennial beds. Pardon me?
What are the 4 things in the 4
It's loam. It's the earth, sand, peat moss, and manure.
And do you recommend that for the ground plots as well?
Oh yes, yes, and
not just the raised beds.
No, for ground plots and for perennial beds. And one thing that we can get here in Winnipeg is the mushroom compost. Like if you've got kind of a tired bed or ground plot, if you can get some of that mushroom compost, one of the soil supply companies sells it, and dig some of that in, it really works well. I mean, you don't want to overdo it, but it's already been composted, so it's not going to burn. Because sometimes manure, if you're getting manure from some source that you're not sure whether it's really composted well, if you put too much, it could be too much of a good thing. Anything else? Okay, well, good luck. I'm glad to see you're going to give it a try. And just, you know, if it doesn't work one year, try it again. My sort of ending comment is be a farmer, because if farmers had quit with every failure, we all would have gone hungry a long time. Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you everyone very much for coming. We have a bunch of other workshops coming up as well that you can see on the website. The Making Manitoba Delicious workshop is Saturday, May 12th. We have a Talking Food in St. Vital workshop coming up on May 15th. We have a tour of Winnipeg Harvest coming up. And also, if you're interested, we have an Intro to Seed Starting workshop coming up next Wednesday. That's for the Dig Deeper families, which anyone is welcome to join, and you get a free seed starting kit from Sage Garden Herbs. So if you're interested in that, you are more than welcome to just email us at Food Matters, and we can switch you over to Dig Deeper, and you can get a free seed starting kit if you're interested in starting your own seeds for your garden this summer. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm Dana, and that is Kylie, and you can email us, or we'll be here for the next bit too. But thanks very much for coming.